Hello, everybody. How's it going? Ben Gothard here with another Project Egg interview. And today we have on an extraordinarily special guest. I would like to welcome the amazing Kim Garst. Kim, thank you so much for jumping on the call. I really do appreciate it. And how you doing today?
I'm doing great. I'm super excited that I'm here and that we finally made this happen. So thanks for staying with it and keeping after me.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. It is absolutely my pleasure. So let's jump into the interview. My first question for you today is, what is your story?
Ooh, what is my story? Well, I like to tell people I'm an accidental entrepreneur because when I started way back in the day, I'll give you a little background on how I got started. I think that's important. But I was on my way to law school and already been accepted, had all my, how when you're young, you have a path. And I was the first one in my family to get a college degree. So it was a big thing for me to one to accomplish that and to been accepted to law school. That was a big deal. And I had my oldest son. He's 26 now and dating myself a little bit. But the minute they laid him in my arms, my world shifted. And for anyone who's, had their own child, especially moms, they can probably say, oh, yeah, I can see how that happens because it does. Your priorities shift, your focus shifts. It certainly happened for me. So I made the decision to not pursue law school at that point in time. And I was working as a paralegal. I quit my job. My husband was in the military and we were, I say young and dumb. We thought we could do it. We thought we could go from two incomes to one and still be okay. It quickly became apparent that, that wasn't the case, to maintain the lifestyle that we had at that point in time. It was going to be difficult to do on his salary alone. So I was like, okay, what can I do from home? Because I don't want to put my child into daycare. And back then, that was way back in the internet. That was the olden days. But there were no resources online, really. The internet was just beginning to become commercialized. And, you couldn't watch YouTube videos until your eyes bled to learn something because there was no YouTube. And so I basically just taught myself. And it was a long learning curve because, like I say, there was nobody to teach me how to do things. And I didn't even know how to cut and paste when I started. I didn't even know that there was such a thing. So when I tell that to young people today, they're like, what? That just makes no sense. How is that even possible? But that is absolutely the truth of it. So I taught myself web design and I leveraged B2B boards and AOL business chat rooms back. That dates me too, right? And so I would try to connect with people that might need my services in those spaces. And my goal when I started literally was to make an extra $200 to pay the car payment. So it's a long story, but that's essentially how I got started.
That's amazing. So
And
I
I
want.
would like to add this because
Mhm.
I think if there's people that are listening that or watching that are struggling and they've been struggling, I just want to say this. It took me 5 years to make my first $60. 5 years.
Wow.
So don't give up.
That's amazing. So, I wanna take a little step back and dig a little bit deeper into your history. If you don't mind speaking about it, what sort of home were you raised in? What was your childhood like? I really would appreciate it if you could take us back to the very beginning.
Sure, absolutely. Well, my parents, my biological parents, are divorced, and I was 13. And wow, nobody's ever asked me to come to talk about this, but it wasn't the best environment. It wasn't that we did without or that it was abusive necessarily or any of those types of things. But my dad was a cheater, and it just was a tough thing to watch my mom go through all that. And when I was 13, I literally packed up our car, put my little sisters in the back seat, and I said, "Mom, come on, we're leaving." And we left. And she begged me all the way down the road to my grandparents, which was about 4 hours away. Just let me go back. I'm like, no, we're not going back. And so I had a very ingrained sense of protection, I think, from a very early age, and that's something that's been carried throughout my life. I am definitely a protector, and sometimes good and bad. But that was a defining moment in my childhood. And then my mom remarried to an awesome man. It's not that my biological dad is not an awesome guy. He is. He'd do anything in the world for you. But he just, at that point in time, he just wasn't, what's the word I'm looking for? He just wasn't faithful. There you go. Wasn't a faithful husband. So my mom remarried a couple of years later, and to a very godly man, and he raised us and changed the course, I think, and I've told this to him, changed the course of how we turned out, myself and my sisters, in a big way. And I'm very thankful to him, because I don't think we would have had maybe the moral background, upbringing that we had if it hadn't been for him. So I'm very, very thankful for him. I had a loving mom, never had any, I don't have any bad childhood stories necessarily to tell outside of that one, I guess. And we were, grew up, and my dad was an elder in the church. My mom was a church pianist. We were in church every time the doors open. I lived in a very rural area. When and that point in time, I was like, I can't wait to get out of here. There's got to be a bigger world out there, Now, of course, it's nice to go back and kind of experience that slower pace. But at that point in time, I was like, yeah, I got to get out of here.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah.
So, I want to touch on two key things that you talked about, back in your childhood. The first was that defining moment when I believe you said you were 13, and
Yes.
you said, all right, well, we have to leave, we have to go, and you were talking about being very protective. Um, that having happened, and that trait having been expressed very strongly, then how do you think that has manifested itself later on in your life in entrepreneurship and in more of your adult life now?
Well, now I'm very passionate about women being able to stand on their own 2 feet, probably because of my previous experience. Now, I wouldn't classify myself as a feminist, like, oh my gosh, I definitely wouldn't. Not that I don't care about women issues, but I've been married for 32 years, so I am very thankful for that. So I'm not like a man hater or any of that kind of thing. But I do believe that women should be able to financially stand on their own 2 feet and support themselves and their children, because you never know what life will throw your way. Whether it's a divorce or whether it's a disability or a death, even, heaven forbid. So I'm very passionate about that. And then I think the way that has revolved or evolved into how I, deal with other entrepreneurs is exactly that, I'm very encouraging. I'm very like, you can do this kind of thing. And then I'm also very, I get a little sideways when people are in situations where they're not supported. And so that gives me more of, let's help that person a little more. Let's, make sure they have that support system because they don't have it in their home. And that I think is how it's manifested in how I deal with others and that are entrepreneurs or budding entrepreneurs, is, like I say, that passion is very definitely rooted in my childhood.
That's incredible. That's incredible. And the second point that I wanted to kind of discuss a little bit further was that of morality. You said that your stepfather
Yes.
was a very morally sound man, and that he kind of instilled that into you and your siblings. Can you talk about how important that aspect of morality and ethics and integrity is in the business world, in entrepreneurship?
Well, one of the things that I find, especially in the social space, is there's so many people constantly, daily, minute by minute, judging someone else based on how they believe or don't believe. It's such a huge problem right now, whether it's politics or religion, or if it's just people going at each other because they don't agree. And I think that in the social space, a lot of times people will say things that they wouldn't say to your face. And so for me, as it relates to not just handling things, on a business perspective, but in the social space, because I'm so active there are people watching. There's way more lurkers than there are engagers, and so I'm very cognizant of that. And I'm not here to judge. My job is not. That's a higher power. I really, really try very hard not to be judgmental of someone else's belief system, even though that might not be mine. And I would like that same favor returned, and so that's kind of one of the things that I am very passionate about is, let's have some respect for differing opinions. I think we're losing that right now, and it's a sad thing. And then, as it relates to just doing the right thing because it's the right thing. And I think sometimes when you're an entrepreneur, especially if you think it's going to cost you money, or, those sometimes you hesitate to do the right thing. But I've never had an instance where doing the right thing has failed me, taking the higher road and doing the right thing, even though it might financially cost you, or it might, not be exactly what you would prefer to do, human nature being what it is. But do the right thing. It's been my experience that never has failed me.
Wow.
Sometimes it doesn't, and you can go to sleep at night. You never have to worry about it if you feel like you've done the right thing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, I want to move a little bit further on in the chronology. I want to talk about when you were on your way to law school. So what really piqued your interest in going to law school? And then can you talk a little bit more about making that transition from not going to law school and really how you started your first businesses, or how you really got started?
Sure. Well, it's interesting that's a great story actually in and of itself. My husband was in the military, and I was looking for a job that I could do that would kind of take me, go from place to place, that I could take with me, wherever we went. And I landed a job as a paralegal. Now, I didn't have a paralegal a certificate or whatever at the time, but they trained me, and so I started working as a paralegal, and I was finishing my school at the same time, and that spawned the interest in law. Essentially, I was working very closely with one of the lead attorneys in this law firm, and learned a ton from him. Very fascinated by the whole law process. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna become a lawyer. And so that's how that happened. And then the transition from being so proud that was actually coming about, that I'd been accepted, and then having my son, and realizing that really wasn't what I wanted. Part of it was wrapped up in the roots of being very excited about the fact that I was the first one in my family to have a college degree. And then, you always wanted to do more, so the whole concept of, oh, I'm going to be an attorney, everybody in my family was very excited for me, and I was very excited for me. But when I had my son and realized that I wasn't even sure if that was really what I wanted, or if that was just what I was doing because, of ego. But he was the most important thing at that point in time. And it wasn't difficult for me to let that go, surprisingly, which led me to think that that wasn't what I really wanted. I was like, well, if it's so easy for me to let that go, then maybe that wasn't my path. But that said, it was very difficult to just, you hate to say, just be a mom. That sounds so like bad, because being a mom is probably the most important job you can ever have. But I did need that something else, and maybe I wouldn't have gone after something else if it hadn't been for the financial constraints that we were under, because I needed to make some revenue. I needed to bring in money so that we had enough to live on. So that spawned the whole journey that I started on, was how can I make a little extra money, and that's essentially, it's been one thing led to another. And you had asked about, well, and I shared that I started a web design company. Well, that spawned so many other things. So what would happen is I would design someone's website, and then they would be like, okay, I gotta have hosting for it. And I realized, well, I'm farming this out. Why don't I just start a hosting company? So I started a hosting company. I had a dial-up company. Yes, way back in the day. And then people would be like, okay, well, now I have a website and I need to market it. How do I get it out there? So that spawned the whole, knowledge, selling my knowledge really that's where the light bulb truly went on, when I realized that my knowledge was more valuable than the services I was offering.
Wow, that's incredible. So you said that, I believe you said that it took you 5 years to make your first $60.
Yes. So crazy, right?
Yeah. Can you talk about what was that like for you? What was that moment like for you? When I got it was nobody pays with checks anymore, hardly, but it was a check. And when I got that check, and I'm like, look at this, I was so excited. I was telling my husband, and to this day, he took we cashed the check. He asked for one of the dollars, and he framed that for me. So I have my first internet dollar. It's framed. So looking back on it, I'm like, why in the world didn't he say, smack, Kim, it's been 5 years, go get a job, but he didn't. He supported me, and, he gave me the time I needed. I would literally, we were stationed in Fort Rucker, Alabama, and there was no real space for a desk. And so the hall closet was kind of long, and so I stuffed a desk in there. We took the door off, and so when I would work in that closet, I had to pull the chair out, and the chair would sit in the hallway. But that's where I started, and how I just did what needed to be done until I figured it out enough to where I earned my first $60, and it just kind of snowballed from there. But if I'd have given up, which it would have been so easy to do, I of course wouldn't be where I am. Absolutely, that is such an inspiring story. That is incredible.
So thank you.
So let's talk a little bit about when you really made that transition from being like a startup entrepreneur when you're first getting started, you're really excited about your first dollar, it's all framed, until you really started becoming successful and you really started to pick up some traction. What were the things that I guess shifted for you that caused that transition?
Well, it's funny you say that, because there's a very defining moment when that happened. I had encountered and was doing business with two businessmen from North Dakota. And I had done their website, and that, similarly to what I shared earlier, they're like, okay, now what do? We need to market it. And so they hired me. They said, hey, can we just come down and pick your brain for a day and And I'm like, sure. So they literally came. My husband stayed home from work that day because he's like, okay, there's two gentlemen coming. We don't know who they are. They could be axe murderers. I'm like, they're not axe murderers. But they sat in my dining room because that's where my office was at the time, and all day long we just brainstormed their business, what they could do, how they could market it. And at the end of the day, they said, because we'd never discussed what they were going to pay me, at that point I was like, well, maybe I'm assuming they'll pay me, but it was one of those things, like I was just trying to help. But they said at the end of the day, hey, what do we owe you? And at the time, I just threw out this, like, what I thought was an astronomical amount of money. And I said, $100 an hour. To me, that was like a lot of money. And so they just never even hesitated, wrote me a check. And my husband was standing in the doorway and he said, I saw the light bulb go on in that moment. And that's really when that was a pivot for me, is I realized in that moment that my knowledge was really way more value based than trying to hustle for the next client for a web design. So that was very definitely a pivotal point. I went on to build my first seven-figure business from my dining room table.
Wow, that's incredible. So that then begs the question. How did you build that seven-figure business? Maybe you could lay out kind of like a blueprint that a beginning entrepreneur, somebody who's just getting started, could follow these actionable steps and build a business similar to that.
Well, funny you say that, because when I said I was an accidental entrepreneur, I'm not even joking. I had no frame of reference at that point. It was just about the work. Let me, it was get it done. And I'll never forget, my husband walks into the dining room one day and he says, do you have any idea how much money you've made this year? And no. To me, I can make money, but I love making money, but the money is not about what I'm about. And I don't even track it really. I mean, somebody else manages it, figures it out. What do we do with it? As long as we have it, that's good, right? I know I sound like, oh man, she is a ditzy blonde, but no, I mean, seriously, I'm really not about, I just don't pay attention to that kind of stuff. So when he told me that I had earned, $1 million that year, I'm like, no. He's like, yeah, I've been tracking it. Yeah. And so for me to say, hey, do this, do that, I can't really say that in that first business, because it literally was an evolution that I can't say I can go back and, okay, I did this, I did that. It was just one thing spawned another, and I would see an opportunity and I would step into it. If one of the things that I did, and I learned this purely by accident, was when someone would come my way and they wanted something that I didn't do, instead of saying I don't do it, I would find somebody who did, say somebody that was good, and then what are your fees for that? And then I would mark it up and say that, technically that I was doing it. So I would outsource a job, but I would make a sizable amount of money, because usually and back in the day, the simple things like CGI scripting was, now there's so many amazing things that you don't have to do any of that kind of stuff. But that was a big thing then. And so if somebody needed something built or designed or whatever, I would just mark up my guy's time by 50%, and I made as much as he did.
Wow.
So those are types of things. But again, it wasn't something that I knew ahead of time or that I can cognizantly say I was doing. It just, opportunity led, one thing led to another, and that's essentially how I evolved.
So once you did finally reach that seven-figure mark, did that change your business model at all? How did you then progress from there?
I wouldn't say that it necessarily changed my business model at that moment. It was probably when I started my fifth business. I would say, yeah, that I was more intentional. I mean, that sounds ridiculous, but it's true. If I have to be truthful about it, because everything before that was just get her done, and then with, I guess it was my fifth business when I was a lot more intentional. Well, you learn a lot, by that point in time, and so that gives you a baseline. Before, I didn't know anything. I mean, I didn't have anybody to train me, so I just did what was next. Just it was kind of like just happened. And I know that sounds ridiculous, but that's truly how it went.
Wow, that's incredible. So for that entrepreneur who's just starting out, would you advise them to be more intentional with their business, or would you say kind of follow your route and just do what comes next and step into the opportunities as they arise?
Well, when I started, there wasn't nearly as much competition, obviously, as there is now. And today there is an expert on every corner for about any niche, out there. So yes, I do think that there is some measure of intention that needs to go into, setting up a business today, and in what order maybe that you need to do some things. But I also feel like there is a place, and definitely a time for those gut things, where you just know this is the direction you should go. And I think that a lot of entrepreneurs don't listen to that. They see what everybody else is doing and they're like, well, it's working for them, I better do what they're doing. Instead of just saying, does that feel right for me? Is that what I need to be doing? And bringing their own uniqueness to their business. I see a lot of people struggle with that part of it. And that's the necessary part. That's the part that makes you stand out from the everybody else kind of thing. But I think a lot of times people, especially if they're a new entrepreneur, they're like, oh, let me just follow what that person's doing because it's obviously working, instead of just digging down deep and really bringing out their own uniqueness. And lots of times, not to say that you can't succeed by following what someone else is doing, because you can. But I think in today's space, especially in the social space, it's so important to have that unique value proposition and stand out on your own versus, being a lookalike.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, I feel like there's somewhat of a competing ideology here, right? Of go towards doing what other people are doing, or really let your own personality shine through. How do those two ideologies relate to learning specific skills, and how do we approach learning skills as we're trying to decide the path?
I actually, that's such a great question. I'm so glad you brought it up, because when you don't know something and you're learning it and then you want to implement it in your business, there is nothing new under the sun. I mean, I'd like to say that. So truly nothing new under the sun. The difference, and I think this is I'm glad you asked the question, because otherwise I don't think I would have articulated this. So simply because but it follows on with what we were just talking about, and bringing that unique value proposition. If you're learning something new to you, it's not new to, across the board, because like I say, there is truly nothing new anymore. The new comes from you. Then you learn something and then you put your spin on it. You make it your unique thing, and then you take it into your business, and it now has a fresh, it may be exactly the same. It is exactly the same strategy or exactly the same whatever that and you're going to implement it in your business, but take what you love about it and leave the rest. That's what brings the unique pieces and parts of individual personalities to the same old, same old. And I think that's the difference maker.
That's incredible. That's incredible. So it seems like we need to be going out and we do need to be learning these skills, but then we need to be applying them in unique ways that are, again, unique to us, and expressing them in very different ways, because that's what's going to help us stand out. That's very interesting. That's a
You know,
very
a lot of, if you are in any niche, you're following any of the, experts in that space, you'll notice that there is a lot of commonalities. I mean, and that's going to be the case across the board pretty much for any type of an entrepreneur. There's, like I say, there's nothing new under the sun. There's certain things that are going to be the same, but there is, the difference is how you teach it or how you share it or how you bring you to it. You don't just say, okay, well, wow, Grant Cardone is doing XYZ, and I'm going to do it just like that because it's working for him. No, you can do that, but bring you to that, whatever that is, instead of just trying to copy and be, an exact replica. Say it like he says it, that kind of thing. How would you say it? How would you teach that, or how would you project that? So I think that's the difference, is you truly can learn the same stuff everybody else knows and have the same level of expertise in whatever niche you're in, but the difference maker is us. Each of us has something unique to bring to it.
That's incredible. That's incredible. So if you were to go back now, to when you were first getting started, knowing what you know now, what would you have done differently, if anything?
It's probably the thing I still struggle with the most, and that is focusing on my strengths and outsourcing my weaknesses. If I could tell my younger entrepreneur self one thing, outsource quick as you possibly can. I know a lot of young entrepreneurs are scared of that concept. They're like, well, I don't have any money. I'm not making much money. So, but if you hold on to that, it's almost like it's kind of like a lack mentality in some ways, simply because you're so focused on the fact that you don't have, that you can't really focus on what you can have. And you can't do it all on your own, especially in today's world. When I started way back in the day, and it was easier. There wasn't as many pieces and parts to build in an online business. Today, it's just mind blowing. All the stuff that you have to do today. Even if you did a fraction of it to be successful, it's still a lot of stuff. And so I think that would be the one thing that I would say to my earlier entrepreneurial self: get help quick.
That's fantastic. Now I think that's brilliant advice. I still think that there's a little bit that we need to touch on regarding that, because I think it is difficult sometimes for us, especially as beginning entrepreneurs, to identify what those strengths are and what those weaknesses are. And I guess the term for that would be self-awareness. But how do we come about really identifying what those strengths and weaknesses are?
Well, I usually break this down into things that you absolutely have to do in your business. There's nobody else that can do them. And then I share this strategy with people all the time, and it's a real eye opener for them. If you get out a piece of paper and a pen and you write down the things, everything, just do a dump. What do you do in your business each and every day, or weekly, or monthly, or whatever it is? If it's accounting, is it? Everything. Do you pay the bills? You've got to pay yourself? Do you create content for social media? Do you blog? Whatever it is, do a dump. Write it all down. Everything that has to happen in your business, even if it's not happening right now, but it has to happen. And then go back and check the things that you absolutely have to do. Nobody else can do them. And you will be stunned at the things that you can outsource, that you don't have to do. And then it's a matter of prioritizing those things. What happens when you are a entrepreneur and you really don't, especially young entrepreneurs, and you really don't know what you're supposed to be doing, or what you become spread so thin that the things that make your business money fall way down because they're an elephant. And well, let me see. I gotta go create a social media tile for Facebook, or I've got to respond to this text or this phone call, and before you know it, your day is gone and nothing has been done to market your business or do anything that ultimately creates revenue for your business. So it's really important, I think, for people to do that. Just do a dump of everything that you have to do in your business, whether it's being done now or not, and then start to prioritize where you spend your time. And let me restate that too. If you know that there's things that create revenue for your business, then that's where your focus should be, versus the things that you think your business has to do to grow. So find somebody who can do those types of things for you, and then focus where you can create the most revenue, your time and energy, where you can create the most revenue.
That's amazing advice. And I actually challenge everybody, if you are struggling with this right now, go back and listen to what Kim said a couple of times and really let that sink in, because that was brilliant advice. So I want to talk a little bit more about these really key things for entrepreneurs. And I think that one of the biggest things that we haven't touched on yet is talking about how to decide what to actually pursue, right? Because there's investing, there's marketing, there's sales, there's accounting, there's leadership, there's all these different types of things. And if we don't know what we want to do, it's then hard to do that dump and write down all the different things that you need to do in your business, because you don't actually know what it is you want to focus on in the first place. So how do we identify what it is that we want to pursue and avoid dabbling?
That's a $1,000,000 question, because especially in today's world, because again, if most people will tell you, well, what are you passionate about? Let's just focus on what you're passionate about. But there are a lot of people who don't even know what they're passionate about. So they'll think, well, I could do what that person's doing or that person, instead of really just looking into them themselves and saying, what do I want to do? Now, that said, I feel like I am the master of the pivot. And I want to talk about the pivot, because when you just have to get on a path and you have to get started. If you don't do that, it doesn't mean you can't deviate, that you can't turn around. If it doesn't feel right to you, 6 months down the road, you're still struggling. Maybe it's time to pivot. Maybe it's a small shift. Maybe it's a big shift. Sometimes when you are on the path, or on whether you know exactly what you want to do yet or not, you learn as you go, and that will build and be reinvested into whatever you eventually do land on. I know it's a convoluted answer, but the reality of it is there really isn't a fast answer to this. It's a journey, but you have to get on the road. No standing by the sidelines and watching the train go by, or, you got to get on the road. It doesn't mean that, like I say, that you have to stay on that path. It'll be a constant evolution, and maybe a pivot here and there. But I think a lot of times people get so hung up on the fact that they don't know, that they just don't do. And so choose something. It doesn't have to be your it forever, but choose something and get started.
I think that is amazing advice. Because it really will unfold for you as you go, and as you start taking action and meeting people and doing all these things. The opportunities will present themselves. But I agree with you wholeheartedly that the biggest mistake you can make is not getting started.
Yes. And I think a lot of people get paralyzed by the very thing that they should be doing, because they don't know exactly I don't know what I'm passionate about. That's okay. Just choose something that you think you like enough to get started, and then things will evolve. And more, I would say, I've never seen an example of someone who just got started on something that experience didn't add value to whatever they ended up with. The journey will help you when you finally figure out what it is. and it will evolve. It will, like you say, it will present itself. The opportunities, you'll begin to see things that, wow, I think I like that, or I think I like this, or wow, I'm really, and sometimes you just find what you're passionate about through that journey versus not knowing and not doing, you know.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, in your own life, you said you got started with web design. When did it become clear that this one thing was your passion, and what is that passion for you?
For me, I'm very passionate about helping entrepreneurs grow. You know, whether they're just starting, and to your point, not really knowing what they want to do, or whether they're, creating a little bit of revenue, but they're not where they want to be. That's kind of my a serious jam, because they already kind of feel like they have a passion and they have a business, but they just need to make more money. I love that space because I feel like I can really, get my fingers into other people's businesses and help them, move forward and create more revenue. To people who are creating a lot of money already and just need to refine their systems, and of course to make more money. So I'm kind of, bottom line, it's all about helping people. For me, it's about helping people with the knowledge that I've amassed over, almost 30 years now, giving that knowledge back in a way that moves someone else forward.
That's incredible. That truly is incredible. So, we've talked a lot about your past and how you got to the incredible place that you are now. Could you maybe round off that section and almost brag a little bit, if you will, but can you just talk about some major accomplishments in the past 30 something years that you've been an entrepreneur that we didn't talk about yet? Maybe brag on yourself a little bit.
I hate this part, but because I'm like, I don't toot my own horn very well, but I have built 7 purely online businesses that have created multiple 6 and 7 figures over the course of the last 26 years. And through that journey, I've been able to, I prayerfully, I hope I have, blessed a lot of other entrepreneurs along the way, whether it's through my knowledge that shortened their learning curve, which that was such a struggle for me. So that's one of my passion centers is, how do I shorten someone else's learning curve so they don't have to spend 5 years to make their first $60. There's so much information out there today that it's almost information overload. We almost have the exact opposite of where I was, where there was no information. Today, it's very difficult to know, who do you even pay attention to? Who has the knowledge that I need so that I can move my business forward? Because there's so many people out there that are, quote unquote experts. So finding that person that resonates with you, who, you feel has demonstrated in whatever it is in their business that they can teach that piece or part to you. But it's been just a constant evolution. I shifted my business to the social media side of the house about 8 years ago, I guess, 9 years ago. And again, it was very similar to what I experienced with web design. And web design, people would say, oh, if you don't have a web design in 5 years, you're going to be out of business. And then social media came along, and I heard the same kind of deja vu thing, where if you don't, if you're not on social media, you're, in the next 5 years, you're going to be out of business. And I'm like, I've heard this before. Maybe I better pay attention. What's this Facebook thing? So, and I got busy, growing my business using Facebook because it was a natural progression for me. Because I told people, I was like, I've been doing social media before it was called social media, because I was using like B2B boards and AOL business chat rooms to connect with people. This just made it easier and more public, and so I've built $1.5 million almost. I think about, I think the last time I did the math on it, it was like 1.6 million a community in the social space across all the social platforms. And, I've had lots of accolades, Forbes top social media power influencer. There's lots of stuff out there, but it's been a true journey, and again, just an evolution of, one opportunity led to another.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And you mentioned you were on the Forbes list. I believe I read that for everybody, both men and women, you were in the Forbes top 50. Am I correct in that?
Yes, there's actually two lists out, I think, that Forbes put out. One was top 50, and then there was a top female list as well. And I think I was number 8 on that list.
That is incredible. That is
Yeah.
incredible. So,
and of course, I wish they still did that, because, those lists are so old, but still, it's pretty cool to say that, you were listed by Forbes as a top social media power influencer.
yeah, that's amazing. That's amazing. Okay, so we talked a little bit about your past. I actually talked a lot a bit about your past, and
Yeah.
it was very insightful. So thank you for that.
And yeah, I shared stuff that I haven't told anyone else. So yeah.
Well, thank you.
Good
Thank you.
questions.
Thank you. I wanna talk about right now. I want to talk about in the present. What is your biggest focus?
Well, my biggest focus right now is around starting a new company. I'm getting ready to start a new company, and a new brand maybe is a better way of describing it. And it's going to be focused on, and again, I haven't shared this with anybody else, so you guys are getting the skinny. It's going to be focused around entrepreneurs people, not entrepreneurs, because I don't think they're going to be necessarily entrepreneurs yet, but people who need the side gig. I think that in today's world, it's going to become necessary for pretty much everyone to have some sort of a side income, whether it's Uber or, we're already seeing it, where a lot of people have taken on Uber, and, they're making an extra $200 a week or whatever. So I think there's a big need. And my hope is, and by building this new brand, is that if I can create enough interest in that people are making a little extra money, how many of those people can I actually convert to true entrepreneurship? Where instead of like leveraging, Uber or, some of the other opportunities that are out there, how can I bring them into owning their own companies and starting to market them and growing them? So that's kind of my it's kind of a passion project, because I'm very passionate specifically about young entrepreneurs, because I wish that I had known, when I was, your age, what I know now, or had the opportunities that are out there today for young people. It's very difficult, even if you have, an education and you've got a college degree. It's very difficult to walk into a high-paying job. So my hope is that I can catch some of those young entrepreneurs, that I can make an impact, and we'll go from there.
That's incredible. That's incredible. So that's your biggest focus right now. But what about in your personal life? We've been talking a lot about your professional life. We touched a little bit about your personal life before. But what has the journey really been like for Kim?
Well, it's weird, because I have 2 boys, and my oldest is 26. My youngest is graduating from college this year, so he's 22.
Congratulations.
And thank you. It is a big, I need the congratulations. But I am proud for him. I'm excited that he's graduating, and so we are empty nesters, essentially, So, and what we found, once we no longer had the kids in the house, that we just turned to work more. And so we've slowly but surely been trying to stop that pattern, So we're planning to travel a lot more, and I'm excited about that. I had never been to Ireland, so I had a speaking gig in Ireland 2 weeks ago, I think it was, 3 weeks ago maybe. And I'm like totally sold now on, let's just go. Let's just do, we can both work for wherever we are. Let's go do an Airbnb somewhere and, stay a month. So we'll see. But that's good. That's kind of on my wish list of things to do on a personal level.
Fantastic, fantastic. So, we talked a little bit about your past and how you got to where you are now, which has been an incredible story. We talked a little bit about what you're doing now, and both personal and professional. But what does the future hold for you, both personally and professionally? Where do you want to be in 5, 10, 20 years?
Well, I don't think that I will ever not work because to me, it's not work. Honestly, I'm very passionate about changing lives, and so I think whether I'll be where I'm at now in 5 years or probably be a variation of where I'm at because I'm like I say, it's a constant pivot. You know, I'm already feel like I'm pivoting a little bit more because for social media, for example, which a lot of people know me for, is evolving. And, I think there's a need for just core basic. You can't really make social work for you if you don't have a core business strategies that go with that. So I think for me, it'll be more the same, but maybe just different flavors. But my hope is, like I say, that I can, just leverage what I know and what God's blessed me with to, make an impact in whatever way that, presents itself.
That's incredible. That's truly incredible. So, we've been providing, or you've been providing, a ton of value on this interview so far, and I really, really appreciate it. But I kind of want to get into a little bit of the technical. Give some real strong value. If you had to pinpoint your greatest skill right now, and I guess a skill that you teach most often, that you see is most needed in the entrepreneurial space. First, what is that skill? And then can you kind of give us like a breakdown of what we need to do to become better and maybe not experts because it takes a while, but how to approach that mastery of that skill?
That's a big question. But I think if I had to say, well, what do people know me for? It would probably be social media knowledge. But I've always said, even from early on when I first started with social media, that I'm about the business end of social media. Don't just be on social media to chit chat. I mean, what is the business goal? And I really wish that I had been more intentional when I first started with social media in driving a business result with everything. So one of the things that I am constantly telling people is anything that you share in the social space should have a business intention. Whether that's to get an email address, whether that's to drive engagement or, get people to pick up the phone or, create a sale. It should have in other words, don't just share something in social media for the sake of saying, I posted something on Facebook today, check that blog. What is the end goal for it? Otherwise, I think you're just wasting your time. And then I'm really big on sharing that the money is in the list. I don't care what anybody says. The money is in the list. Move people from your social presences as quickly as you can to your list because it's going to become increasingly difficult for your content to be seen. We're already seeing it on Facebook where if you have a fan page, nobody's seeing your content, right? Unless you're paying to get in front of your fan base. And I think that's going to be true across the board for a lot of the social platforms. It's going to increasingly go to a pay-to-play model. So move people from social media to your list as quickly as you possibly can.
Absolutely, absolutely. And if you could maybe give us some actionable strategies on how to do that,
Right.
what would you say?
Well, there's a couple of ways that, let's just use, I'll use Twitter and Facebook kind of as the two elephants, right? Whether or not some would argue that case, and probably but I'll just use them for example purposes. But on Twitter, one of the things that I do frequently is share my freemiums, my ethical bribes, I call them freebies, whatever, lead magnets, whatever everyone else calls them. But I will routinely share those on Twitter, sometimes 2 or 3 times a day. Obviously, on Twitter, you can share content a lot more frequently than you can on your Facebook page or, LinkedIn or wherever else you're sharing content. But on Twitter, I share my free offers several times a day. Now they're different ones. They're not like the same one. So if you just have one, for example, maybe you don't want to share it 3 or 4 times a day. But I do that. That takes them to a landing page and they have to opt in for that. And therefore I've moved a social connection to my list. You can do the same thing on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, put the link in your bio. So those are all ways to drive traffic from where you're giving content to get in exchange for an email address. Another great strategy is leveraging the power of Facebook Live or, any of the other live applications as well, whether it's YouTube or Twitter, etc. To where you are, again, giving away something that's value-based. You're training on it maybe, hey, you've got 5 ways to do X, but you have a worksheet that they can go and download. If you are not familiar with Amy Porterfield, I would say you are, but maybe some of your listeners might not be, but she has a very amazing strategy to build that she uses exhaustively and very effectively. Every time she does a podcast, she has great content, and then almost every time she will have some kind of a freebie that she offers up that goes along with the content, and therefore she builds her list like that. So the freebies are probably the best strategy because people are like, oh yeah, I want that. Whether it's a checklist or a worksheet or an ebook or, a video that goes along with something you're teaching. Those are all great ways to get people on your list.
That's amazing. Those are some very actionable strategies. And again, I challenge everybody to go back and listen a couple times to what Kim has been saying throughout this whole interview because there are some serious value bombs that have been dropped here. So, thank you for that. But yeah, Kim, I do want to thank you so much for coming on the interview today. It has been an absolute pleasure. I hope you've enjoyed yourself as much as I have.
Thank you. Yes, very insightful questions. And like I say, you dug a lot of stuff out of me that most people don't. So.
Great. Well, I do have one more question for you. Is there anything about yourself that you think is an important part of who you are that I did not ask you about today? In other words, what did I miss?
Well, I don't know that you missed it necessarily because we did touch on it in a roundabout way, but I would have to say that the number one thing that guides pretty much everything I do is my faith. And, I don't, a lot of people ask me about it because I do share my faith pretty openly in the social space. And a lot of folks are like, well, I've always heard you don't share like religion and politics on social media. But for me, it's, again, it's part of being authentic, and I don't do it from oh, you got to believe like I do, or, it's not about me trying to convert someone to believe the way that I do. It's just about being true to who I am and then, putting that out there. And I think that whether it's faith or whether it's something else that is super important to you, I think you got to let that shine. Otherwise, it's like cutting off a limb. You're holding back and lots of times it's also what is the defining thing about you. What makes you unique. So, if you're reluctant, if you're faith-based, or if you have something else that you are reluctant to share, let it shine. Be who you are.
That's great. That's great advice. So again, Kim, I want to thank you so much for jumping on the interview today. It's been an absolute pleasure. If people want to learn more from you or try and reach out and start working with you in some way, shape, or form, what's the best way for somebody to take the next step?
Well, you can find lots of great content specifically around marketing your business, mostly from a digital marketing and social media perspective, on my blog, kimgarst.com/blog. But you can find me on Twitter or Facebook under my name, Kim Garst. Tweet me, send me a message on Facebook, whatever. Either of those works.
Fantastic, fantastic. And so, if you guys can just look down below, I'm going to put all those links that Kim has mentioned just now. Highly, highly, highly encourage you to go check out Kim's blog and just really get into the ecosystem, because Kim has amazing content and knowledge to share, and I highly encourage everybody to reach out. And again, watch this interview a couple times, because there are some really valuable pieces of information that you will not find anywhere else. So, so Kim, thank you so much.
Ben. It's been so much fun.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much. And to everybody who's listening, thank y'all so very much. So we've been talking today with Kim Garst from Virginia. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I guess we should have said,